Greetings, all. This is Thandisizwe Chimurenga, and I wanted to talk to y'all real quick about Thursday, August 29th show so that I don't leave anything out. I wrote it all down, and I'm going to be reading from it, like I said, so I don't leave anything out. So, my show, Rootwork, airs on the third and fourth Thursdays of the month in Los Angeles on KPFK 90.7 FM. I've just started live streaming what I'm calling that local edition here on Black Liberation Media also. Yesterday, Thursday, August 29th, the show aired live, but it had a bunch of technical difficulties for whatever reason, and like it usually does, unfortunately. But this time I decided to remove it and re-upload the interviews I did with Amber Sims of Brokish and with Jollene Levid of UTLA and Affirm because of the feedback received during the show, so that the folks who watch the show live will be able to come back and get the information that was presented. And if you missed the show, you can now check out the information that was presented. I keep saying that it is possible to present quality content of substance, information, resources, news, etc. That's important that you can use. It's possible to do that and present it to you in a way that you are deserving of. But for whatever reason, I have not been able to do that yet. Other folks can do it. Tandy having issues. I don't know what that's about, but I'm gonna keep working on it. So, regarding these interviews that aired, did you know that systemic racism costs Black women $50 billion annually in wage penalties? I didn't know that. That's a lot of money. So here's the first interview with Amber Sims of Brokish, talking about Black women, venture capital, and our wages. With me now is Amber Sims. She is one half of the duo that does the podcast Brokish. Amber Sims grew up with a value-oriented, aka cheap, father who taught her very early on to budget and stretch a dollar. As such, she's had a love-hate relationship with money her entire life. A lawyer by trade, Amber's true passion is empowering people through taking difficult or intimidating information and making it accessible, enjoyable, and understandable. Having formerly worked as a prosecutor, Amber saw firsthand how money and financial resources, or the lack thereof, could easily change. Thank you so much, Amber, for being on Rootwork today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad we finally got to link
I
up.
was going to say, I'm glad we finally got to do this. Now, please let our audience know, what is Brokish and why is Brokish?
So, Brokish is a podcast where we talk about the ways that America conspires to break Black people through all the broken ish around us, the broken systems, the broken promises. And so, um, the good thing about it is that we are not broken because we are resilient people. We are people who have joy and refuse to give up, but we are certainly broke-ish because of all of the things that this country has put us through. And so our podcast really just explores the ways that systemic inequity has conspired to break people over the last 405 years.
So, by brokish, you mean kind of broke, but also broke-ish, as in ish being an expletive that we can't say on the air in certain areas because we will get an FCC violation. Is that correct?
You picking up what we putting down.
Thank you so much, Em.
You
All right, so
picking
now
up.
you've talked about brokish, what the podcast does, why it exists, and that also leads me into why I wanted to talk with you today, in particular about what happens around Black women and money in this country.
Mm-hmm.
So we all have heard, we should have heard about an organization known as the Fearless Fund. which provides venture capital grants to Black women-based organizations, companies, etc. And as part of the attack on affirmative action, etc., by conservative activists, this became their latest target last year, 2023. And we have, this is from June of this year, this is in Forbes magazine. Court blocks Fearless Fund's exclusive grants for Black women. Again, Forbes magazine, this is from June 4th of 2024. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit has halted the Fearless Fund, a Black-owned venture capital firm, from awarding grants solely to Black women entrepreneurs. The court ruled that this practice likely violates Title 42 of the U.S. Code, which ensures equal rights and prohibits racial discrimination in awarding and enforcing contracts. Now, this is the same argument that was used targeting affirmative action in, I believe it was Harvard, and in admissions to Harvard and one other institution. And Edward Bloom, the same person behind that lawsuit, that legal strategy, is behind this one. Edward Bloom, president of the American Alliance for Equal Rights, a nonprofit challenging racial distinctions in courts, filed a lawsuit against the Fearless Fund on behalf of 3 anonymous small business owners who claimed they were ready and willing to apply for the grant, but couldn't because they are not Black women. Bloom argues that civil rights laws do not permit racial distinctions, insisting that race should not be a factor in public policies. Amber, in your expert opinion, what do you think about this ish?
Well, I want to just briefly tell you how incredible it is the way this country gaslights us, because 42 USC section 1981, if you don't mind, it's just a couple sentences. Let me read it to you to show you how this country gaslights us. Mm-hmm. So it states that all persons within the jurisdiction of the United States shall have the same right in every state and territory to make and enforce contracts, to sue, to be parties, give evidence, and to the full equal benefit of all laws and proceedings for the security of persons and property, as is enjoyed by white citizens. Mm-hmm. So it was a remedial statute that was meant specifically to protect Black people. And so the fact that the 11th Circuit has layered this race neutrality on top of a law that was written specifically for Black people, and they are using it to dismantle this program and support allegation of discrimination against white people, is like as American a gaslight as I can think of. And part of what bothers me so much is that we now have this pretend race neutrality that we are writing into the law, that even the law itself says we acknowledge it doesn't exist. 42 USC 1981 was meant to protect Black people. It should, as a matter of construction, you know, all these people like your Clarence Thomases talk about your original construction, and we're going to get to the intent of the law. It is very clear from a reading of this that it should not even apply to white women in the first place. And that is what really annoys me the most, is how comfortable they are taking positions on the law that are so contradictory to the stuff that they tell us forms the basis of why they do what they do.
Yeah, it's enough to make your head hurt. Absolutely.
Yes. Now,
I don't subscribe to the belief of reverse racism, especially when it comes to white people. But here's my question. Why couldn't these anonymous 3 white women apply for something else? I mean, if this had been a federal program, perhaps, not really, but okay, perhaps you could say, well, this is discriminatory because this is the federal government and the government is supposed to work for all quote unquote Americans. This is a private entity which exists along with that code that you just read to remedy a racial wrong. That's the
Right.
part that really gets me.
Absolutely. And when we look at the fact that less than 1% of venture capital funds go to Black women, it highlights why we have to have this in the first place. And also, I will note that this is made even more diabolical when you know that people like Edward Bloom are completely ripping off the playbook of the NAACP, of the Legal Defense Fund, in setting up these test cases, because they themselves don't even contend in the lawsuit that there are not funds available for women who fall into the category as the named plaintiffs. They don't even contend that there aren't other ways that they can seek venture capital. They just simply say, well, we want to do this and we can't do this. And so we're going to bring a suit, which
Because we
again
can't do this. We mad about it.
is as American as apple pie.
Mm.
And it is also a ripoff of the NAACP legal defense strategy of setting up test case through named plaintiffs who are denied. However, in the cases where the NAACP were doing it, there was a legitimate denial. You legitimately can't sit in this seat on the bus if you're Black. You legitimately cannot go to a quality school to get a public education if you're Black. And so that's another thing that bothers me. And actually, the dissent in this case sort of intimated at that. This is clearly a setup, because these ladies don't even allege that there are not other venture capital funds that are available to them that they could seek.
We just mad because we can't get part of this one, or we or which might be the crux of the issue. We mad because this is for you.
Bingo,
Mm, mm,
bingo,
mm.
bingo.
I'm speaking with Amber Sims. She's half of the duo that produces Brokish, a podcast that makes intimidating information accessible, enjoyable, and understandable. Amber says she grew up with a value oriented father, which is another way of saying cheap. Now, you mentioned earlier about less than 1% of venture capital funds go to Black women. What was that statistic you quoted for me?
Yes, so that is actually a statistic that the Fearless Funds attorneys put into their brief to the 11th Circuit, that the 11th Circuit cited in the case. And
Mhm.
so, based on the data that's available, and quite frankly, it's probably lower than that, but the best guesstimate is that less than 1% of venture capital funds go to Black women who are seeking funding for their startup businesses in technology.
Which brings me to my next point. Now, that's talking about Black women in terms of entrepreneurship and their own businesses. This is from the LA Focus newspaper, which is a local paper out here in Los Angeles. And let's see. There we go. Let's take ourselves out of it for just a moment. This is June 21st, 2024. Systemic racism costs Black women $50 billion annually in wage penalties. Over a lifetime, Black women lose an estimated $1 million. Well, this one says $1 million in wages because of racial discrimination in employer hiring and wage practices, says labor economist Michelle Holder. According to
Mhm.
data from the Bureau, of Labor Statistics, Black women earn 73 cents for every dollar a white male earns. Black women have historically had the highest labor force participation rate among major female demographic groups. Still, they face both the gender and racial wage gap, which Holder calls the double gap. Overall, Black women annually face a $50 billion wage penalty, she states. Black women have the lowest levels of savings and assets of any racial group, notes Holder, who is an associate professor of economics at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, City University of New York. More than half of Black and Latino households have no retirement savings. And so you could say, as a way to make ends meet, have another income stream, do something else, you attempt to create your own business. Here's this venture capital fund that exists to give you help. Why? Because you need help. And now that's being attacked also.
Yeah. And also, when you layer that on the fact that not only are Black women underpaid, but we're expected to do more with our money than other people. So
Mm.
not only are we not getting our entire dollar and we're only getting our 73 cents, um, add on to that the fact that with that 73 cents, you have to factor in the lack of public preschool and available childcare, health inequities, and the lack of access to quality healthcare without bankrupting for a lot of people. You have to think about the fact that we are literally in a housing crisis where affordable housing for a lot of people is not available. And so when you factor in, not only are we getting paid less, but we're being required to do more with that money. I think that's very insightful to why a lot of households don't have retirement, why a lot of households are within 30 days of full blown financial insecurity. It just, for a lot of people, takes two paychecks
Hmm.
to go into full blown financial crisis.
And when you factor in healthcare, health crises, medical emergencies. Mm, mm,
Yes,
mm.
yes,
Let me ask you this. You state that you are a former prosecutor.
I was.
And as a former prosecutor, quote, you saw firsthand how money and financial resources, or the lack thereof, could easily change a person's legal outcome. Now, I'm sure our audience knows what that means, but refresh our memory. Can you give us some examples?
Absolutely. So for example, the difference between, I have had people who, think about how a case becomes a criminal matter. So um, the police write a probable cause affidavit, they seek a warrant to arrest you, you get arrested. Well, think about where in the life cycle people who are declared indigent get an attorney. After they're already arrested, they have to come up on something called the jail chain, which is where after you've been arrested and put in jail, your opportunity comes up to go before the judge to get a bail or a bond hearing and then get out. And so for some people, that could be 3 or 4, maybe even longer, depending on how efficient the county is where you get arrested.
Three or
Well,
four,
let's
what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear
three
you.
or four days. I'm
Three or
sorry,
four
3 or 4
days.
days.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, that's the basis for a termination right there, not showing up
Mm-hmm.
for work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, think about when you have money. So there are people who, as soon as they know the police are investigating them, they have money to hire an attorney. That attorney is able to get in on the front end, and that person knows they're getting arrested. So the attorney coordinates a walkthrough where you're never even put into the system. You're literally walked through, you're booked in, and you're booked right out because your attorney knows to schedule it while the magistrate is on the
Okay.
bench.
Okay, hold up, hold up.
Hmm.
That really actually happens.
Oh yes, I can't tell you how many cases
No, no,
I've
no,
worked
no. No, no, no. I'm serious. That actually happens.
with.
They don't sit in a jail cell.
No, the
They
attorney
don't.
coordinates
They don't.
everything.
They don't eat the white bologna sandwiches with just mayonnaise.
No,
I ain't gonna tell you how I know
no.
about this, right? They really, for real, seriously, truly.
Yes, the attorneys will reach out to the arresting agency or sometimes the district attorneys directly and be like, look, my client is not talking. We want to turn ourselves in and do a surrender. Will you agree to this day and time? And it's usually early in the morning when the magistrates are on the bench. So the
Mhm.
person can come right in, get walked right through intake, go straight to the bench, get their bond, and they're out. I've seen it happen in less than an hour in smaller counties, less than an hour. Yes. So, but that's also the difference between having sometimes 5, 10, even $20,000 in a retainer to pay an attorney versus having to fill out an affidavit of indigency, get your indigency approved by the court, get an attorney hired, get an attorney present in court to argue the conditions of your bond. And then if you think about it, for people who are in that position, let's say you get a $5,000 bond. Well, the bond company is going to want 10%. That's $500. And so for a lot of people, that is a prohibitive amount of money. Not to mention, you've been gone from work 3 or 4 days. I can't tell you how many people on the back end come and they don't even have attorneys anymore. And they're begging the prosecutors, hey, can you please work with me on this probation? I have even had people say, I'll rather go to jail because I've already lost my job. I've already lost my place to stay. And I know if you put these fees on me, I'm not going to be able to pay them. So will you just give me jail time instead of giving me all these fees because I can't afford them?
And time served and it's all over with.
Yes.
Wow. Now I had a guest. I can't remember the name of the guest. That's horrible, I know. But we were maybe it may have been from the Debt Collective. I don't know. Anyway, the Debt Collective deals with the issue of not just student loan debt, medical debt, legal debt. They believe that there should be no debt. We ain't paying all this, that, and the other. And I was asking them the question. I'm going to ask you the question as prosecutor, because I know there's at least one person out there in the audience, at least one. If you've got a job, what is going on in your life? You know, we're assuming you're gainfully employed, you're responsible. But what's happening in your life that you have now been put into contact with police and the legal system?
It can be all kinds of things. I will give you an example because to me, this is an example of where sort of cultural insight meets the violence of the American criminal justice system. The last case I worked before I left the DA's office was an older retired Black man who had served his country in the military. He was retired from a job as well, never had any criminal issues. And he was going to see his daughter one day at her apartment complex. And he was riding through the complex and there was some young boys playing in the street. And he told them to move so that he could go through the complex. And the young boys, I think they either flicked him off or they cursed at him. And so he got out of the car and took his belt off and popped one of the boys on his behind. And the mother pressed charges against him. And that man was facing a family violence charge where it was like basically assault of a minor. And it was a family violence charge. And he was going to lose like his veterans housing. He was going to, lose all of these things. He had been making ends meet by substituting at a school. But obviously, if you get an assault family violence against a minor, you cannot work in a school.
You ain't working at nobody's school no more.
Correct. And so this was an example of one of those cases where, certainly you can't put your hands on other people's kids, but the way that it was being handled reflected an out of touch reality with who this person was, their history. And I didn't get to see it through to the end because I was trying very hard to work out an acceptable plea arrangement that will allow him to keep his housing and not have an affirmative finding of violence against a child on his record. But I mean, that's one example that I can just think of very easily of people who could actually be law abiding their entire life. And then they do something that is rooted really in culture and rooted in, quite frankly, their own past and their own past experiences about how we live together in community, much more than it is about them being criminal. But that was about to cost him literally everything.
And even though I asked you that question, of course, I already knew the answer. One of the things that I do is I won't say I monitor media. I'm not gonna lie. I consume media. I be watching videos, right? Yeah. And a lot of these body camera videos, very, very popular on YouTube now. So much. I think the word trauma is a good word for it. So much trauma happens around traffic violations, Black folks, the law, and cars, how we operate the car, getting out of the car, police escalating unnecessary situations. And then again, we find ourselves in the back of a police car going through what you call that jail chain and either about to lose or everything that we have worked for then becomes lost. So absolutely.
Absolutely. And one thing to remember also, when we think about like Black women and financial trauma, if I had $1 for every time I was pleading out a case or trying a case, and we're talking about the fees or we're talking about the restitution, and it's somebody's mama, their Black girlfriend, putting the weight of that financial obligation on their back to
Mm-hmm.
try to keep their loved one out of jail, to try to keep
Mm-hmm.
them compliant with their probation. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things that we often forget when we talk about how much we actually have to do with our 72 cents, because a lot of times the real privilege of wealth is that it flows forward. But the trauma of inequity is that our money oftentimes flows backwards. When we get our money, we're having to help this person and help that person and do this. And that's a lot to do with
Mm-hmm.
72 cents.
73.
So, yes, let's state it factually correct.
Let's be factually correct. 73 cents. I've been
Yes.
speaking with Amber Sims of Brokish, a podcast where they take intimidating information, make it accessible, enjoyable, and understandable, but they also talk about all of the brokish ways that Black folks in particular have been impacted by this system, this corporation, if you will, known as the United States of America. Amber, I'm so glad you are no longer a prosecutor. I'm so happy about that.
Me too. Me
For
too.
for audience members who want to follow you and the work that you do with Brokish, how can they do that?
Yeah, so you can find us on these social media streets. The easiest way to find us is to go to www.brokish.com, or you can find us on Instagram at Brokish Podcast, and that's all one word, BROKEISH podcast. And so our podcast is available wherever you stream your podcast, Apple, Spotify, Google. So we're there and we're not too hard to find.
And please forgive me. I keep talking about Brokish and Amber Sims. Please forgive me. Your co-host is named Erica Brown.
That's right. That's right.
Forgive
The
me,
other
Erica.
half,
I'm so sorry.
that's all right. She be doing me bad, so we don't have to bring her up today. We don't have to bring her up
Well,
today.
now don't drag me into y'all stuff now. That's not the way to go. Amber, one more time, give us that information on how to follow you and Brokish and Erica.
Yeah, so Erica don't really be on social media like that, y'all. She just be lurking.
Can
But
you
you
give
can,
us the information, please?
yes, ma'am. You can find us at Brokish Podcast, BROKEISH podcast.
Mhm.
Or you can find us at www.brokish.com.
Now that's not with the dash. That's just all just straight out
Just
broke.
straight Brokish, BROKEISH.com.
Amber, thank you so much for being on Rootwork today. It has truly been a pleasure.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. That was Amber Sims of Brokish. Next up is Jollene Levid, an organizer locally with the United Teachers of Los Angeles and an organizer internationally with AFFIRM, which stands for the Association of Feminists Fighting Imperialism, Refuelization, and Marginalization, speaking on the need to document the stories of Filipino women in the labor movement. Joining me now is Jollene Levid. She's been a full-time union organizer for over 20 years in her hometown of Los Angeles. She's been a regional organizer at United Teachers of Los Angeles, UTLA, for the last 9.5 years and was co-coordinator of the 2019 UTLA strike, the 2023 UTLA Solidarity Strike. She previously organized with healthcare workers for 11 years. Jollene is also a survivor and a feminist, and for 22 years, she's been a member of the anti-imperialist transnational feminist organization AFIRM, that's AF3IRM, which stands for the Association of Feminists Fighting Fascism, Imperialism, Refeudalization, and Marginalization. Jollene was previously the national chairperson and currently serves on AFIRM's international committee. Jollene, thank you so much for putting up with my shenanigans and being on Rootwork today.
Thank you for having me, Thandi. Anything you ask, I will be there.
Shh, don't let the world know all of that. So you are a union organizer and have been for the past 20 years. That's your day job. And the other times, the shenanigans you're involved in is fighting for, or fighting, should I say, against imperialism here in what we call the belly of the beast. But now, as part of your work, you're involved in a new project documenting the voices of Filipino workers, specifically Filipino women. Is that correct?
Well, it's highly feminized. It's mostly women.
Okay. Women. Well, tell our audience about that, please.
Sure. So last winter, LA winter, at the end of 2023, I was offered a fellowship by the UCLA Labor Studies program department. And they said that I could be a fellow and I could do anything I would like with resources that they would offer. And so what I decided to do was start to document some of the stories of striking workers in United Teachers Los Angeles, particularly those that participated, led, organized in the 2019 and 2023 United Teachers Los Angeles strikes. I think I should back up a little bit. In the Filipino diaspora, particularly in the Filipino American community, there's a lot of scholarship around Filipino farm workers, more recently domestic workers, but less so around striking workers that are winning really big victories in different sectors across workplaces. So, for example, there's less scholarship in Filipino studies, Filipino American studies around the striking and winning hotel workers, the striking and winning nurses that are striking hospitals and clinics across the country. And another place where the Filipino diaspora is seen because of migration patterns is in public education. And as I was organizing with all workers, all 33,000 in 2019, and then all 37,000 in 2023, what I realized is there are so many Filipino and especially Filipino women workers that were deeply involved in the strikes of United Teachers Los Angeles. And I'm just capturing their stories for future scholarship, for future organizers to study methodology, journalists, documentary filmmakers, anyone that just needs their stories.
Well, as you know, oral history and documenting is something that is near and dear to my heart. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you about this project. Now, it says United Teachers Los Angeles, but it's not necessarily a union that is open only to teachers, correct?
That's right. So it's actually a union of educators. It includes school social workers, counselors, school nurses, special education educators. There are psychologists in the unit, adult education educators. There's tons and tons, audiologists, different educators within LAUSD. Same employer, which is LAUSD.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned earlier I believe you mentioned or I read it, the autobiography of Philip Vida Cruz.
Yes.
And I know for me personally, being raised here in Los Angeles, the popular history we get of the farm workers, the great boycotts, Cesar Chavez, Central Valley of California, Mexican Latino workers. But Philip Vida Cruz was a Filipino man, and the stories of the farm workers, it's not just limited to quote unquote Latino or Mexican farm workers. Tons and tons of Filipinos were also farm workers and a part of this movement, correct?
Absolutely. I think what gets lost in history, and this is something that anyone from Dolores Huerta to the United Farm Workers themselves will talk about, is actually it was the Filipino worker union that went on strike first.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Latino, largely Mexican union then went out. The United Farm Workers was founded when they finally merged.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's important to note that Filipino workers were not the majority, but there was Filipino leadership in the UFW. There was the Filipino union, largely Filipino union, that went out first. And Filipinos were at the strategy table from the beginning to the end. Yeah, and I also think, I mean, you know, everyone does the solidarity clap, right? That came from the farm workers movement, and that solidarity clap was kind of a signal to stop your work and strike, and it was a clap instead of a saying, so that everyone, regardless of what language you spoke, would understand that call, which is why it's called the solidarity clap. Something that I, as an organizer myself, was very moved by was Philip Vera Cruz's it was also an oral history, actually. And he ended up organizing in Los Angeles after he left the farm workers movement or retired from it. And I realized that if I hadn't read that book in 2001, I wouldn't have sought out the UCLA Labor Summer, which I entered as a student. And after I organized through UCLA one summer and then in the Philippines after graduation, I wouldn't have come back and found a job organizing at King Drew Medical Center. That book really set me on the course. And it has great sayings. I encourage anyone to pick it up. I still think that the principles hold true today, which is, you know, a movement must go beyond its leaders, right? Which is something that I know UTLA subscribes to in our drive constantly towards supermajority organizing, not just militant minorities or just leadership. That's number one. And number two, as I became a feminist, actually read Audre Lorde's book, Sister Outsider, that same year.
Well, hold on. What's the name of Philip Cruz's autobiography again?
I believe it's just Philip Vera Cruz. It just says Philip Vera Cruz on the front. It's actually not penned by him. There are two scholars. I know Lillian Villanueva was one of them that took his oral history and wrote out his story. Yep.
Okay. But you were saying about Audre Lorde.
So Audre Lorde's book also woke me up and made me realize that I had to practice feminism as a survivor. By the time I finished high school, I was already a survivor of domestic violence. And as I've continued to organize over the last 20 years, I've seen women trade unionists at the helm of the different organizations and campaigns that I've organized with and for. But there lacks this a rich oral history tradition of these women trade unionists. And again, I'm largely organizing in Southern California, Los Angeles, California, So a lot of them are also women of color or racialized women. And I need to see books. I need to see books about these women that are leading and winning strikes, high stakes strikes. People talk about the strike, but when you look at these women, they're actually winning, which is something you don't see a lot of in the strikes that we read about in history. So I do not have the capacity to write a book, but what I do have capacity to do, well, with these resources from UCLA, is capture some of the stories of the organizers, the elected leaders, the strategists, the researchers, the rank and file members that made the 2019 and 2023 UTLA strikes winning strikes. So that was the idea behind all of it.
I remember both of those. They were major, especially 2019. That was like a mega strike. You all had Hollywood folks out there on the picket lines with you. I was like, whoa.
Right.
But also not just major, but you were also, like you said, winning. That's the thing that I think, as I've also organized over the years, has mattered more and more to me. It's great. I think it's important to protest, to picket, to engage in direct action. But what does it mean when we don't win? And what can we do better as organizers so that we're actually winning high stakes campaigns? I think a lot of people write off nurses and educators because they're so-called feminized professions. But there was a reason why the mayors in both the 2019 and 2023 strikes, the mayors of Los Angeles, stepped in. And it's because when the workforce of one of the largest economies in the world, Los Angeles, doesn't have a place to put their children because educators are on strike, it's not just about childcare, it's also about this idea of stunting the entirety of the Los Angeles economy. And then they demanded things like green spaces for kids, for smaller class sizes. It's not just about wages and benefits. Housing is a big one, right? So it's like they're actually winning these high stakes strikes at the end of the day. I'm speaking with Jollene Levid. She is a full-time organizer with a regional organizer at UTLA, the United Teachers of Los Angeles, co-coordinated the 2019 UTLA strike and the 2023 UTLA Solidarity strike, previously organized with healthcare workers for 11 years. She has also been, for the last 22 years, a member of the anti-imperialist transnational feminist organization AFFIRM, the Association of Feminists Fighting Fascism, Imperialism, Refeudalization, and Marginalization. So the UTLA work, the SEIU work, all of this union organizing, that's your day job. Can you tell me how and if and how the skills, the strategies, what have you from your day job factor into the work with AFFIRM and transnational feminism?
I think that both AFFIRM and UTLA work have made me a better activist. I mean, just basic things that people don't think about. Like, what are the logistics of putting together a rally that will eventually have 80,000 people at it? Right? Things like that. But also, in AFFIRM, we are all volunteer. We are not a 501c. We are not a nonprofit. People can donate, but we are all volunteer. All of us are working, many of us multiple jobs. Many folks are caretakers, whether it's for children or elders, or just our loved ones, folks that are disabled in our families, etc. And so what we've also learned is that we have to be strategic in the fights that we pick. So, for example, there was, right as the pandemic was starting, I know that everything was a blur, We won something called Survivors Not Criminals, which was passed through LA County Board of Supervisors and finally implemented towards the end of the lockdown. And what that did was it allowed for women and people trafficked in massage parlors in Los Angeles to not be picked up and criminalized when massage parlors were busted for being, for example, trafficking fronts or of trafficking. Instead, it would, one, automatically direct victims of trafficking to resources, and two, give them a path to citizenship if they so choose to take that path, instead of automatically locking them up and or putting them in proceedings for deportation, right? So we called it Survivors Not Criminals. Again, that was all done on a volunteer basis, but a lot of us, when we come from unions, folks that study policy, I mean, either they're just geeks that really like it or they do it for work. We're able to do that on our quote free time. So that's one thing. We've also done a lot of, public or mass education around trafficking, around the sex trade, especially across borders. And in highly militarized places, like, for example, the Affirm Hawaii chapter has a military base there. Right now, they're working on publicizing a case of a missing, possibly murdered Indigenous Hawaiian and Filipino woman who was living on a military base. So this is the work of Affirm, and it's come a long way. It was founded in 1989, and we started off as a Filipina-centered organization. Again, many folks are survivors of political violence. The founder was a former political prisoner, Ninochka Rosca, of the dictatorship in the Philippines. And many of us are also just descendants. My maternal grandmother was a comfort woman during World War II who was captured by the Japanese imperial forces. And she was raped. She was harmed while my grandfather was put in the Bataan Death March, right? So we come from lineages of survivors of, the effects of imperialism and militarism in our families' homelands.
I was going to ask you, you touched on it, but I was going to ask you, what does it look like to be a feminist fighting fascism, imperialism, refeudalization, and marginalization in Los Angeles, within the United States of America?
So that's a really great question. And I think the Survivors Not Criminals is one campaign that we waged. Other campaigns include, for example, there were about 25 traffic workers from the Philippines. This is when we were still Gabriela Network, and working on their case and highlighting it so that they could be free. There was another transnational case with Grace Grande of transnational border stalking, and creating and winning freedom for her and ensuring that other people who are stalking and battering across borders from the Philippines to the United States would be legally stopped. I'll just say that. And then there's also just other things that sustain us. So in this age where people are highly isolated, doing transnational work with, for example, one of the Affirm women, Valeria Espinosa, is in Mexico right now, and alongside a women's art collective doing political work that will be showcased both in Mexico City and eventually here in East Los Angeles. So the kind of popular education that can be accessed by people who can't go to the UCLA libraries is equally, if not more important to us. There's also a School of Women's Activism that's held every summer, which includes all of these things, from how to build a campaign to understanding what imperialism is, this big word, right? Or even like, what is feminism and what are the different kinds of feminisms? Understanding all the different strands. We also do a School of Youth Activism, so that youth, especially girls that are as young as middle school aged, could also start to think about these ideas. They don't have to wait to learn it in their ethnic studies classes in 9th grade. And so that's a little bit about it. I mean, I have to say that I think that Affirm has saved my life in so many different ways, both as a survivor and also as someone who has just become sharper and sharper. The more I study and the more I practice in a feminist space, the better union organizer I am.
So for this oral history project, getting back to that real quick, it's going to be launching in October of this year?
Yes. So everyone is welcome. There is an RSVP process because there will be free dinner provided. But on Monday, October 21 at starting at 5 o'clock p.m., the first set of oral histories will be launched and archived at UCLA. The event is called Filipinos That Strike. And it's going to be storytelling, it's going to be music, it's going to be art, and it's going to be sharing ideas about what to do with these stories, right? I think a lot of times workers and women workers' stories are marginalized in not just academia, but even in just the media. So we're going to have media workers there also. And again, everyone is free to come, but we please ask that you RSVP. It will be at United Teachers Los Angeles, which is on Wilshire and Berendo. It's kind of K-Town, 3303 Wilshire Boulevard. And if you go to UTLA Now, which is the Instagram at UTLA Now, you can click on the information for the link on how to RSVP.
Jollene Levid, for audience members who want more information on the work that you are doing specifically with Affirm, and maybe even UTLA work, how do they get that information?
Great. The best way to keep in touch with UTLA is at utla.net. United Teachers Los Angeles, UTLA.net. And for Affirm, I would follow Affirm, which is AF, the number 3, IRM. Affirm on Instagram, on X, which I believe used to be called Twitter. And it's also Affirm National on Facebook.
We'll call it Twitter.
Yeah, I like calling it Twitter too. Before it bought out, I really liked that outlet. And then on Facebook, I know a lot of siblings from Asia and Latin America are primarily on Facebook. It's Affirm National, so AF3IRM, and then the word national. Okay,
Facebook, Instagram, and what we are refusing to call anything but Twitter.
Correct. Yeah. Never mind all those capitalists that are buying it. Yes.
Never mind all them shenanigans.
Yes.
Jollene, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and being on Rootwork today.
Always for Thandi. Thank you for having me, Thandi.
No problem. Thank you so much. Talk with you later.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
That was an interview with Jollene Levid, an organizer locally with the United Teachers of Los Angeles and internationally with Affirm, the Association of Feminists Fighting Fascism. I left that out earlier. Association of Feminists Fighting Fascism, Imperialism, Refeudalization, and Marginalization, speaking on the need to document the stories of Filipino women in the labor movement. Now, before I get up out of here, let me say, on last week's show, both on KPFK and here on Black Liberation Media, my guest, Billion Godson of the Afrika Town Coalition, in the Leimert Park or Africatown section of South Los Angeles, told us about the continued efforts being made to gentrify the area, and specifically the move to oust a longtime beloved business, Sika the jeweler, from the park. The building, the store that Sika occupied. He actually passed away in June, and his family was given a 30-day notice to vacate. Africatown and others say that Mark Bradford, the artist and MacArthur Genius Award winner, along with his partners in a venture called Art and Practice, are behind this move. I reached out to Art and Practice, and I asked them to respond to those charges. Here is what they said. I'm going to share this screen real quick so you can read right along with me. Well, okay, yeah, that's pretty huge. So, dear Thandi, A&P, Art and Practice, does not own any of the buildings from which we operate, and like other tenants, we interact with the property management company. As members of the Leimert Park neighborhood, we are deeply saddened by Sika's passing, which has left a hole in the heart of our community. A&P looks forward to being a part of the healing and continuing to be a good neighbor and community partner. As a nonprofit focused on arts education and youth, we are moving forward with our mission, a mission that has always celebrated Black contemporary art and supported the needs of our local foster youth. Thank you for reaching out. Sophia Belsheim, Director, Art and Practice. So that was their response to what has been leveled against them, charges of aiding and abetting the gentrification of Leimert Park. So locally on KPFK and here on Black Liberation Media, when I'm able to, I will keep you all abreast of that situation. So thank you again so much for putting up with me and these technical shenanigans here on Rootwork. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share all of the videos on Black Liberation Media. Please like, subscribe, and share on my personal Rootwork page, even though I'm having technical shenanigans. Support Black Liberation Media on the Patreon. That information is in the show notes. And support a sister, me, so I can hire an assistant to help me with these technical shenanigans. Hit that Cash App and that Venmo, which is also in the show description. All right. Y'all take care now. Peace.